Right, so this is part 2 of Unit 24 P3 sensors. It's sensors and outputs. I'll stop talking about that now. So we're just going to go through some very brief examples of different types of sensor. So light sensors. You could have light dependent resistors, photodiodes, solar cells. These all receive input in the form of light. There you go. It's forms of input or output. I got it eventually. On the other side of that, then you have things like lights, lamps, LEDs, displays, fibre optic cables. All of these things can be used in a control system to receive input or output in that particular form. Temperature sensors obviously include things like thermostats, but they also include things called thermocouplers, thermistors, and so on. The outputs, heaters, fans, etc., used to produce or manipulate heat in some way. Then we have force or pressure sensors. So you have strain gauges, which measure the amount of strain on something. You have pressure switches, which receive an input on that. And then outputs wise, you can have things like lifts or jacks, electromagnets, vibration output, like things that vibrate, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I'm expecting a crude comment about that one. All right, and now I've mentioned it, there definitely will be one. Then we have position sensors. Position sensors include things like potentiometers, and so on. Basically, they measure where an object is. Rather than measuring how fast it's going, that's something else, but measuring where it is actually positioned and so on. In terms of position outputs, some of the most important outputs for a control system are here. They're the ones that physically affect the outside world. So we're talking about motors, solenoid switches, and so on. These are things that actually have a physical effect, like electric motors for a remote control car or something like that, or a solenoid switch which turns something on or off in response to a signal. Then we have speed sensors. This is where we talk about things like, for example, tacho generators or Doppler effect sensors. So these measure the speed of something, and that could be almost anything. So it could measure the one people mostly think about is the speed of an object, for example, a car or something like that. Outputs wise, for speed, you have AC, DC motors, stepper motors, brakes, and so on. These are all physical things that are used to manipulate speeds in some way, either increase them or decrease them. Finally, we have sound. So these ones are reasonably obvious. Inputs include things like microphones, but also you can have things called piezoelectric crystals, which receive input from vibration. They react to sound. And then obviously in terms of outputs, we have things like bells, buzzers, speakers, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that's a really whizzy quick thing going through types of sensor, and also a little bit on types of output. And yes, I lied. I said there were going to be 3 videos on this in the titles. I was wrong. I managed to get through it in less time than that. My goodness, I actually managed to get through something quickly without rambling much.